My name is Cassandra. Standing here, in the middle of this silent banquet hall, the weight of the moment pressing down on me, I'm transported back to a time when I thought I had finally found my footing. Just a short while ago, the room was filled with the warm hum of celebration. The engagement party, which was supposed to be the pinnacle of my happiness, was in full swing. My fiancé, Ethan, stood beside me, his hand a comforting presence on the small of my back as we greeted our guests. The venue was a grand banquet hall that my parents had insisted on booking, adorned with cream tablecloths and tall floral centerpieces. Family and friends were dressed in their finest, and the air was thick with the scent of good food and the sound of laughter. My mother, a woman of unwavering self-assurance, took the microphone. With a confident smile, she began to speak about how much she loved me and how proud she was of me. Ethan, a wonderful man who had proposed to me 3 weeks earlier on a moonlit rooftop, was also praised. People around the room were smiling, and I was too, until she dropped the bombshell. Of course, she dropped out of law school and couldn't keep her first marriage together. But here we are, she said, without a hint of hesitation. The room fell into that eerie quiet that only comes when something truly hurtful is said in public. I felt the collective gaze of everyone in the room turn towards me, like a physical force hitting me in the chest. Years of experience had taught me to keep a straight face around my mother, so I didn't flinch. My father, always the peacemaker, stood up from his seat. I could tell from his expression that he was about to try and smooth things over, to protect my mother from the consequences of her words. He reached towards Ethan, perhaps to make a toast and distract everyone, but Ethan was quicker. He stepped forward, gently but firmly taking the microphone from my mother's hand. He looked her directly in the eye, and the room went completely still. Even the background noise seemed to stop. I watched as my mother's confident expression wavered, turning into something uncertain. Should I tell them why you really pulled her out? Ethan's voice was calm, but it carried across the room. My mother's glass slipped from her hand, hitting the carpet and rolling, leaving a dark stain on the cream-colored floor. Everyone's eyes were fixed on her face, which had turned a color I had never seen before. It wasn't anger or embarrassment, it was fear. Ethan knew the truth because I had told him everything 6 months into our relationship. One sleepless night, in the quiet of his kitchen at 2 a.m. I had broken down and poured out my heart. I had told him about the money, about what my parents had done, about the $150,000 that was supposed to be my future. My grandparents on my father's side had set aside a substantial fund for my legal education. They had always believed in my dreams of becoming a lawyer, and they had put it in writing that the $150,000 was for my law degree. My parents were the custodians of that account, and I trusted them completely, as you would trust the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. But by the time I started my 2nd year of law school, the money was gone. It wasn't used for tuition, and it wasn't invested on my behalf. My mother had been quietly siphoning off the funds for almost 3 years to support a lifestyle that my father's income alone couldn't afford. They had bought a second vacation home, renovated their main house, and taken numerous expensive trips. On the outside, it looked like success, but on the inside, it was nothing short of theft. When I discovered what had happened, I confronted them privately. My mother burst into tears, and my father apologized in that way men do when they're more worried about being caught than the act itself. They pleaded with me to keep it a secret, saying it would destroy the family. They promised to pay the money back. I was just 24 years old then, and I still needed their love, so I agreed. I had to leave law school because I had no funding and was too ashamed to explain the real reason to anyone. Whenever people asked, my mother would casually say that I couldn't handle the pressure. She repeated it so often that I think she eventually believed it herself. 2 years later, my first marriage crumbled under the weight of the secret I was carrying alone. I had become a shell of myself, quiet and withdrawn, and my husband couldn't understand what was wrong with me. Nobody knew the real cause of our divorce, but my mother was always ready with her carefully crafted narrative at family gatherings and dinners. Back in the banquet hall, as the glass was still rolling on the carpet, my mother finally found her voice. "Ethan," she said, her tone a warning masked as a greeting. She forced a tight, practiced smile, the same one she used throughout my childhood to regain control of a situation. "This isn't the time or place for this," she said. "You're right. It probably isn't, but you chose the time and place, not me," Ethan replied firmly. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. I stood at the center of this storm, and in that moment, I felt something inside me shift. I had spent so long protecting my parents, carrying the burden of their actions while they went about their lives unbothered, always controlling the narrative about me. But standing there in my engagement dress, in a room they had decorated and a party they had organized, I finally saw the truth. It wasn't loyalty that kept me silent, it was fear. And I was done being afraid. I walked forward and stood beside Ethan. My mother's eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of something genuine in them. It could have been regret or just the panic of someone realizing that their long-held secrets were about to be exposed. I took a deep breath and began to speak, making sure my voice carried across the room. When I was 24, I was accepted into one of the most prestigious law schools in the country. It was the culmination of years of hard work and dedication. I was so excited to start my journey towards becoming a lawyer. But then, everything changed. My grandparents had set aside that $150,000 for my education, and I trusted my parents to safeguard it. But they misused the money for their own personal gain. When I found out, they begged me not to tell anyone. I was young and naive, and I didn't want to lose their love, so I kept quiet. I left law school, and I lost my first marriage because of this secret. For years, I've carried this shame, and my mother has been spreading false stories about me. By the time I finished speaking, the room was completely silent. My aunt had her hand over her mouth in shock, my cousin had put down his fork, and my father was staring at the tablecloth, his face a mask of guilt. I could tell from his stillness that he wouldn't defend my mother this time. Maybe he was finally tired of the lies too. My mother said nothing. There were no more words left to say. Ethan took my hand, holding it firmly but gently. His touch was a reassuring constant, and it was that steadiness that finally broke me. But it wasn't in grief, it was in relief. The relief that comes from finally letting go of a burden that was never mine to bear alone. An hour later, Ethan and I left the party. The night air outside was cold and fresh, a stark contrast to the heat and tension inside the hall. Ethan bought us coffee from a late-night cart 2 blocks away, and we sat on a bench, not saying a word for a long time. Eventually, he asked me how I felt. "I feel light," I told him. He nodded and said it made sense. I apologized for the party ending the way it did, but he smiled and said, "The party ended exactly the way it needed to." I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my parents. There are difficult conversations to be had and decisions to be made about what kind of relationship, if any, I want to have with them. Some doors don't close easily, but I know one thing for sure. I'm no longer the 24-year-old girl who was afraid to speak up. I have a man by my side who knows the worst of me and still loves me. I have my voice back, and that's more than enough to build a new life on. If this story has touched you, please hit subscribe. There are so many people out there who need to hear stories like this, and your subscription helps us reach them. Every week, we bring you real, raw, human moments that remind you that you're not alone. Join our community, you belong here.